As educators, we spend the first few weeks of school creating rules and routines in our classroom. We practice and rehearse how to complete work and just move around our classroom. And at some point, it is time to move on to begin your small group instruction. Now, small group instruction is an effective tool to provide targeted learning to students in a specific area or skill. It allows you to be more responsive to students and learn more about their strengths and needs that they have. With all that said, you may be asking, how do I group my students in a meaningful way so that I can deliver this targeted instruction? In today's episode, I'm going to share with you some ways that you can do just that. Stay tuned. What's kicking, educational rock stars? Welcome back to another episode of Teaching Made Easy. I'm the Center Fairy, your ultimate source into the wonderful world of classroom systems that actually work so that you can finally get back to what you love, teaching. If this is your first time joining me here on the channel, be sure you hit that like and subscribe button and click that bell so that you get notified when I go live or upload a new video here on the channel. Teacher friends, I hope you had an amazing summer break. I know I did. And now here we are back for season 4. I can't believe it. It seems like only yesterday that I was hitting that record button for the first time and just hoping even one teacher would allow me into their headphones or onto their screen. And here we are 4 seasons later. And each week I can't wait to sit down and share another episode of tips and strategies that are going to make your life easier. And that's what I'm going to do today. We are kicking off this season with one of the most asked questions that I get when it comes to small group instruction. Farah, how do you group your students? Now, I could keep this short and to the point, and I am going to keep it short. I could just tell you the method that I use, but the reality is that every teacher is different. Every group of students is different. And while the method that I prefer and what I was able to use for the last big chunk of my classroom days, it isn't the only method that I've ever used. And I always kept others in my back pocket just in case my tried and true didn't work or I was required to do something in a different way. One concern I always had as the school year began was finding a way to group my students that didn't label them. One of the most traditional ways of grouping students is based on their reading level, and this meant that students had leveled readers that were color-coded, and it didn't take long before students knew exactly who was the high group and who was the low group. An alternative to this would be only meeting with certain students during small group, and the rest of the class was just as quick to figure out that they were only called back to the teacher table if you were struggling. Or students started thinking you didn't like them because you never called them back to your teacher table. So then how do we group our students so that students aren't left with a feeling of failure or like they don't matter? We know that small group instruction is effective, but that only happens if students actually participate and engage with the learning that is happening within the small group. The first thing you have to do is collect data. You must understand the factors you may want to consider when grouping your students. Data collection is essential. Ask yourself the following questions to determine how students are going to be grouped. What is their academic level? What are their interests? What are their strengths? What are the needs related to this topic or skill that you're teaching? Are the learning needs that are impacting how you group them? How can personalities affect the dynamics of your small groups? Why am I grouping them? What are the learning goals of my small groups? It is very important to use a wide range of data when you're determining your groups. This can include anything from standardized tests that students may have previously taken or simple assessments that you may have been given at the beginning of the year. But your own professional observations and judgment have to play a role as well. Once you have the data, grab some paper or note cards and write the information out for each student. Using note cards makes it easy to lay them out and adjust them as needed. Now that you have all of your student data in front of you, it's time to decide on the main factor you want to use when grouping your students, such as the academic level. The first way that you can group your students is by this academic level. Now, you could look at previous standardized testing or assessments that you gave and group them based on the grade they received. For example, if you chose to use a reading assessment, then all students within a similar grade range of reading ability would be grouped together. This personally is my go-to if possible because it makes my small group block and reading centers run smoothly with students rotating through the centers and me in small groups. The general idea here is that students of similar academic levels have the same skill deficits, and it'll be easier to address them in the small group setting. But this also has problems associated with the stigma that the lowest readers are in the lowest group. And that's a problem if your students start to tie their self-worth to their academic performance. And it means that you need to be very careful to maintain the anonymity of those levels. If I have a group of students that I notice are starting to make assumptions about the low versus high group, I may try to switch up the order that I meet with them, or I may take an activity that I did with my high group, differentiate it for my low group, and use it. This can often disrupt their thoughts on the matter and leave my lower ability groups feeling very accomplished. Another way to group students is to find common ground between them. This may mean that you need to give them a little questionnaire to figure out what their interests and strengths are in a topic that you're going to be teaching. This way of grouping focuses on what the students do well, as opposed to their academic ability in a subject. Now that you have the student data, you can do one of two things. You can pair students with others that have the same strengths, or pair students with groups that have complementary strengths. This could allow students to learn from each other and actually teach other students their strengths. Another way you can group is using flexible groupings. I pair this with grouping by academic skill, but the problem I have found is that while this is a way that's often suggested for small group instruction, there isn't a lot of practical advice on how to actually make this happen. First off, your groups have to be flexible. This means that what gets a student put in one group or another throughout the year is constantly changing. You may move a student based on needs, like you have too many in a group. Or you may decide that a student really needs help with a specific skill that another group will be working on during a time period. So that student may temporarily be pushed in with that other group. This is my preferable way to run my groupings, but let me tell you, it can be overwhelming and it creates stress if you're not organized and consistent. You can run flexible groups in a myriad of ways, but because I'm all about keeping it stinking simple, I prefer to first group my students by academic level, and then each week when I'm planning my small groups, I look at what I will be teaching in the group and determine if there is a student or two that might need to move to another group for that week. Now, if you're using my Learning Centers Made Easy system for managing small groups and centers, you will want to reserve the flexible group seating for after your students are solid on the routines and procedures of rotations. This usually happens around the beginning of the second quarter. This also allows you to do a little extra more data collecting on your students' needs. As I've said, I like to group my students in multiple ways by combining a few of the methods that I've mentioned. I always start them by academic level. But then there could be factors that require me to put students in different groups, even though their academic level is different. For example, there might be personality conflicts, or as stated when I was talking about flexible grouping, I may have to have a student that needs help, additional help with a specific skill, when another group is going to be focusing on that skill in their small group. I've also been known to use my higher students in my middle and lower groups as a way to provide support to those students by allowing the higher level students to use their strengths to pull the other students up to their level. One note, if I'm having to move students based by personality conflicts, I always go down with the student so they don't struggle with the material that's too hard for them if possible. I can always differentiate the material up if they're in a group that's lower than them. Now, you may be saying, but Farah, which way is best? Unfortunately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. There isn't one way to group students, and the list I've given you isn't exhaustive. Your own teacher judgment and assessment of your students' needs are best when determining how you will group your students into small group teams. When in doubt, start with academic ability and then go from there. Trust your teacher intuition, and remember, if it isn't working, you can always change it. And don't be afraid to pivot when needed. Now, if you're looking to get your math and literacy centers organized this year, I want you to check out our guide, 3 Simple Steps to Organizing Your Math and Literacy Centers, by clicking the link in the description. If you're looking for more tips, strategies, and simple systems to take back into your classroom to make your teacher life a little easier, check out the videos on your screen. Thanks for watching, and keep being an educational rock star.